Hello guys, welcome back. If you're new here, please hit the subscribe button. In this video, we'll be implementing a few functions in our user controller. We're going to implement the get user function, update user, and also deactivate user. So we're going to need three functions, right? So we're gonna need a get user, which should have the same signature as our, because we've already implemented a login and register, right? So we're just going to copy this part. Actually, let me copy from here. So we're going to implement the get user, which should get the details of the logged in user. And I'm gonna copy this down. Also update user, and we're also going to implement a deactivate user. I'm going to explain later why we are not actually implementing a delete but rather a deactivate, right? So I'm going to explain it later. So now we need to implement these three new functions. So in order to access these functions, we need to go to our users route here and change a few things. So we have a get user, which this should be fine. And here we're going to say get user. I'm gonna need to import it. We're also going to implement, let's say, delete. What are we deleting? We're actually going to implement a deactivate user here. Also, what did not, and also update user. So we also gonna no, there's a mistake here. And also we need the router to update the user. We do not necessarily need to pass the ID of the user here because we have already attached if you go back to our auth middleware, you must remember that we have attached the user to the request object, right? So we do not necessarily need to specify the ID of the user here in order to know which user we're going to delete or to update or to get, because on that request middleware, on that request object, we have attached the user, and then that user also contains the ID. So we're going to grab the ID from there. So here we're gonna say update user. Also, we need update user. Why it's still grayed out? Okay. Also, we need to go into our index file here. We're gonna need to remove this. Let's remove this and say users here, and we're gonna put in our route, user routes. So let's import it here. Import, actually, I'm just simply going to copy this line, duplicate it, and user routes. This should be fine. Yes. So we have the users routes here, and then remember we've implemented the authentication here, and we said everything under this authentication middleware will be protected. So these user routes here will only be accessible to users that have logged in, right? Or they have presented a token and we have validated that this user indeed is a registered user on our system. So now we can go ahead, because we've set up our routes here. So now we can go ahead and start implementing these functions. The get user should be the simplest one. Try catch. I'm gonna use a try catch for almost every function. Try catch function here, try catch block, and like this. And then for every error that we catch, you're just gonna simply send it to our middleware. So how can we grab, let me close this, how can we grab the user ID? We simply gonna extract it or destructure it like this, say request.user like this, or we can do it like this, because remember we have already attached the user ID, or we have attached the user on the request object, and then we know for sure that this user object that we have attached on this request has ID or contains ID property, and we know it also contains the email. We also know it contains the email, so, and we can do it like this, right? So what do we need? We need to find constant user, await users, and find one. So we're simply finding the user that matches this ID and also the email that we have attached here on our request object, and we are responding. But we cannot really do this because we know for sure the user exists. But for precaution measures, we can simply do it and throw new app error. Let me see what I was doing in here. Was I throwing the app error? Okay, I was throw app error, and let's say 101, say user does not exist, else respond with a status 200 because everything is okay, and send the message back, user details. What's the problem here? Okay, you should catch up, user details, success, true, and the data is this. But then remember, if we do this, if we do it this way, this function will return every property on our user document, and then we don't want certain properties. We don't want the updated at. We also don't need the password, so we can specify which properties from this document we need this function to return. So in here, we're just simply going to mention that we need the email to be returned and also the name of this user. So things like password, the active flag, the updated ad. Okay, we can also return the active. So we don't need the password, the updated ad, the created ad property. So we only say we need this one. So you indicated that with this one here. So this one means you need the email to be returned, the name, and the active properties. So this should be our get user function. I think it'll be fair if we test it before we actually like move on to new things, right? Onto the new function. So let me open this and run, so we can actually test our function get user. But it's it's the shortest one, so this should work. So our server is running, so we can go ahead and test the get user. Remember in the last video we actually was testing out uh the protected routes, right? So we still have the token from our previous video, right? So we still have the token here. So what we can simply do now is simply say user, wait a minute, let's go back into the index. We called it users, right? So we can go into users, and we know this is a get function. Say I can also save this get user, save, and let me hit send. It should return all the details about that specific user. So you are at home, what's going on, index. Didn't I save this file? Oh damn it, I did not save the file, so that's why it still returns you are at home. So now that we have these new routes here, it should actually return the details of that particular user. Let's go back here and send. Cannot get home. Well, it says we cannot get home, and there's a 404 here error code. So it means whatever route that we specified here. Wait a minute, let me see. Users, it cannot get users. Okay, let me go back in here. um we actually should not use the get function here, because this is a route, right? This is a router, so the get and the put and the delete, they are in here. What we simply need to do here, we need to use the use function. So with this use function, it knows that everything that starts with users slash users, it should go into this file here, and then this file will direct it with in terms of handling the different routes, right? So the get will actually be handled by this function here, the put and the delete. So we were not supposed to use the get here, so it should be a use function instead of get. Okay, now let's see if our server is running. So now our server is running, and so we can go back here, hit send, and yes, you can see we were able to get the user's details with the client name, I mean the name of the user, the email, and also the active flag. So let me change this here and send, and of course this is working. So we need to move on now. We need to implement the update user. So let's implement that. Again, try catch. We need to catch every single error that happens. Catch, and whatever problem it is, we're just gonna pass it in here. Or another way, we can say new app error, instantiate this like this, and say but what error can we send? But actually, let's just leave it like how we're doing it, like this. And we are supposed to update the user, right? So we're gonna do it like this. We need to grab the ID again and the email from the request.user. So we know this is the user that we need to update. We also need to grab a the new information that we need to update, right? So our user has email, password, and also the active flag and the name, right? So what we need to update, we're actually not going to update the email. We're not also not going to update the password, because updating password actually requires more work to ensure that nobody else can actually change your password, right? So we're not going to update the user. We're also not going to update the email, simply because we use the email to identify you. So you cannot change something that we use to identify the user. So we are left with the active flag. So the active flag will be updated in the deactivate user. So what we are left with is the name. So this is the only thing that we need to update. So we need to grab the name from the request body and the name like this. And then we can also check if the name does not exist. If the name does not exist, and we can throw an error here and say bad request, and say no user details to update, right? So if the user has provided this name, so that we can provide we can update the name, we can go ahead and use this function, say updated user here, updated users dot find one and update. So we need to pass in the filter. So this is the query that we need to use to we tell this that we're only going to update a document that matches this these details, or this expression, or this query, right? So we say We update the user that matches this ID and also the email. What are we actually updating on that user? We are updating the name, and we actually passing in the name. So we can do it like this because I'm in JavaScript. So we don't necessarily, we can simply do it like this instead of having to do it like this, right? So we are only updating the name, and we say you should return the new updated user, right? So after updating, return that updated user. So this flag here means it's going to return, it's going to, so by default find one returns the document as it was before update was applied. If you set new equals to true, find and update will return the object after the update was applied. So we need the user details after they have already been updated before we can return them back to the user, right? And then we can send them back to the user like this. But there's also a problem here. There's also a problem here. This function will also return the properties we don't need, like password, updated ad, also the active flag and stuff like that. So those properties we do not need. So in here we can simply use this function to say, okay, you have updated the user, now we need you to return certain properties. So this select function will select the properties that we tell it to return. So we only want the email, the name only. So once the user has been updated, so you can return the name of that user and the email. We don't need the password, we don't need the active flag and stuff like that. Data here can be updated user, and success flag is going to be true, and the message user successfully updated. So why this is grayed out? Okay, so we check if they provided the name to update, and also if they did not, so we say there's nothing to update because we're not going to allow you to update the email or the password. And then after that we just simply say update the name and return the document after it has been updated. And also here we say only return these two fields here, the email and the name. You don't need to return the password back to the user or the active flag, the updated ad. Cool. So we can go ahead and actually test this function. So what we need to do is, okay, wait, let me send this. So we know the user, the name is testing client. Now I need us to add another request in here, a new request. We're going to use a put localhost users and authorization. We're gonna use the better token that we already have in here, and then the body that we're sending only the name, right? Let's say newly updated name. So we can send this. So it says it cannot find. What's the problem? Let me go back again, or specified the wrong part here. So the newly updated user, the newly updated name, and also we say this user was successfully updated. So it means our function works, right? Let me not provide the name, let me just say it's a name, and it should use no user details to provide. So there's an error here because we did not provide the name. So we are only going to update the name, updated name, send, and you can see now we have updated the name. So even if you go to our database here and refresh, there's no refresh here, and refresh, we should be able to see that we have updated that user. I should be the last one. So updated name, so it's working. So our update function is working. Now we can implement the deactivate user, but I've seen something in this function here. The success is not written correctly. So now deactivate user. The reason why we're not going to delete the user, one, we don't want data inconsistencies, right, in our database. So imagine if this user had already added company. So a company will obviously reference the user ID, right? So if this user deletes their account, so it means the companies the user have already added our database will no longer be referencing an existing user, because the user will be deleted on our database. So it's going to cause a lot of inconsistencies, unless, and this is not even practical, unless when the user deletes the account, they also delete everything that relates to them. They delete the jobs and also they delete the companies. But then in our case, we prefer that the user just deactivates the account, so that even the jobs and the companies are still available on our platform. That's the reason why we're not actually going to permanently delete the user from our system. However, what we're going to do is we're going to simply change the active flag. So now this means when a user logs in, we also need to ensure that that user, their active flag is true. If not, if the active flag is false, so it means the user has deactivated the account, so we cannot allow them to log in. So we change the active flag, we change it to true, right? So here we say the user must only be allowed to log in if their active flag is true. So because our deactivate function will simply change the active flag to false, which means the user is no longer active. How are we gonna do that? Let's see. Okay, user, or we simply still gonna need the ID and the email here. Users dot find one, and simply gonna be updated, and simply email. And what are we updating? The active flag here, and we are setting it to be false. And we can also do the same thing here and say we must return. No, what am I doing? This should actually come from this, and then here say deactivated user, deactivated, yes, deactivated. So we're going to return this with a status 200 for success, and send it back to the user and say user is now deactive, or user deactivated. And success true. The data we can send back the deactivated user back to the client. Why there's a problem here? Oh, god damn it, it's clowning on me. And then also here we need to send an error message in case something unusual happens. So now that our server is running, we can go ahead and try to deactivate the user. So what you're simply going to do is call the function delete, and we do not necessarily need, okay, wait a minute, this should be able, should be our update user, I'm gonna save it and I'm closing it. I'm also gonna close this get user, and then this one should be localhost users, and it's a delete request. It's a delete request. Why it doesn't want me to? Oh, actually it's not in this. Let me say save. No, let me close it. Don't save. Add another request here. It's a delete user or deactivate user. Deactivate user with a delete request. Localhost. No, it's actually 3000 to users, and we are not necessarily sending anything. So all we have to do is to make sure that we use our beta token here, and yeah, we should be deleting the user. Oh no, so now it means we have returned the details that we do not need. Let's go back here in our users controller and specify that the email and the name. So now that we have wait, let me actually run this again, and then after we have ran this function, we should no longer be able to log in because we have changed the active flag here to false. And if you go back to our login function here, you'll realize that the active flag here is true. So we are only allowing users with the active flag being true. So if a active flag has changed to false, this query here will not return a user that is active. Okay, you go back here, send. So we can grab this, or actually let me save this. So now we have updated our user, right? So we have essentially deactivated the user. So if you go back to the login function here, I'm sure we still have the details. So we have the email of that particular user, this user that we have just deactivated now. So if I try to log in with it, it should not allow me. So it says the user does not exist because we have deactivated that particular user. So yeah, that's basically it in terms of implementing our user controller. We have implemented the get me or the get user, update user, and also the deactivate user. So in the next video, we are probably gonna implement the company's controller or the jobs controller, but I think it will make sense if we start with companies. Then so we can, when we start adding jobs, we can add jobs that actually belong to a particular company, right? So the next video, we're actually going to do the company's controller. We are getting close to finishing our backend project. So yeah, thank you guys. This is the end of the video. Thank you for checking out this video, and if you haven't subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. See you next time.